Welcome to this explainer. Today we're setting the stage for what is, quite frankly, a fascinating intellectual rescue mission in American religious history. We are going to jump right back in time to explore an era where one of the world's oldest faiths felt like it was standing on the absolute brink. And we'll be looking at the radical and sometimes really controversial strategies that people invented to pull it back from the edge. Picture this: you're standing in the late 19th century. The world as you know it is just shifting violently beneath your feet. For many well-meaning Christians of this era, they looked around and felt their faith was facing a massive existential crisis. The modern world was arriving, and it was arriving fast. To them, traditional Christianity was in severe jeopardy of collapsing completely. So the really pressing question became, how do you save a religion from the modern world? Okay, let's dive into this onslaught. Following the American Civil War and leading right up to World War I, society was fundamentally transforming. People were abandoning rural towns. They were moving into these massive, crowded cities. You had the rise of Darwinism completely challenging traditional creation narratives. You had this increasing secularization of public life. Suddenly, to the progressive, educated class, the Bible and the church started to look outmoded, outdated, and honestly, just irrelevant. So, to counter this, a movement emerged known as classical Protestant liberalism. Our roadmap for today is pretty straightforward. First, we'll look at why Christianity was in jeopardy, then we'll explore their three survival strategies: deifying history, stressing the ethical, and centering religious feeling. Finally, we'll wrap up with their surprising legacy.
All right, part one: Christianity in jeopardy.
The stakes here were absolutely massive, and the intellectual onslaught was heavy. There was this growing, widespread doubt in the historical and scientific authority of the Bible. The authority of the church itself was being aggressively questioned, and just holding on to orthodox beliefs was becoming culturally difficult. It's really crucial to understand that these theologians weren't trying to destroy the church. They genuinely believed they had to radically adapt or watch their faith die.
Which brings us to our second section, Strategy 1, Deifying History. Now, what's really interesting about this first strategy is how it quite literally elevated the historical process itself to a godlike status. Basically, if you want to see God, you look at the unfolding of human history. Now, this required a major shift in how they viewed central figures, particularly Jesus. The traditional Orthodox view held that Jesus was God incarnate in the flesh. But the liberal Protestant view totally redefined him. They didn't discount him, they actually highly revered him, but they viewed Jesus as a human who was just perfectly in touch with God and the historical process. He wasn't a deity to be worshipped, but rather the ultimate human embodiment of the divine relationship with history. So the goal wasn't to worship him as God, but to closely imitate his human connection to the divine.
Naturally, this completely changed how they read the Bible. They didn't just throw the book away, but they completely changed their hermeneutics, their entire method of interpreting the text. They argued you shouldn't read the Bible as some strict theological or doctrinal rulebook. Instead, it was to be read as a historical document that slowly unfolds these eternal human principles. And the greatest of these principles, seen from Genesis all the way to Revelation, was love. Finding these principles for personal and social ethics entirely replaced strict doctrinal interpretation.
Because they deified history, these folks were incredibly optimistic. At the end of the 19th century, they truly believed humanity was just getting better and better. They were expecting this glorious, progressive 20th century. But then reality hit hard. In 1914, the sheer, mechanized brutality of World War I absolutely shattered the illusion of endless human progress. And as we move into the mid-20th century, World War II and the Holocaust further derailed this optimistic theology. I mean, think about it. If God is the historical process, what happens when history becomes a waking nightmare? That was a massive, devastating reality check for this first strategy.
So, moving right along to Section 3, Strategy 2, Stressing the Ethical.
With history proven to be wildly unreliable, this strategy shifted the focus entirely away from what you intellectually believe and placed it squarely on how you practically live. Their absolute mantra became life, not doctrine. It didn't matter what precise theological boxes you checked anymore. What mattered was living a good, moral, ethical life. Under this strategy, the whole concept of divine judgment was pushed out of the picture, mainly because it just made people nervous. Instead, Jesus was viewed strictly as the ultimate moral example of love.
Now, focusing on ethics sounds great on paper, but when you strip away all doctrine, things can get pretty wild in practice. Dr. Roger Green highlights some vivid, almost bizarre anecdotes of how far this actually went. He recalls visiting a church where the adult Sunday school had literally no Bibles. They had to go dig them out of a dusty cupboard. Meanwhile, the children's Sunday school had replaced the Bible entirely with Mickey Mouse and Davy Crockett cartoons because they genuinely believed Disney offered better, more accessible moral lessons. He also noted this experimental church in Greenwich Village where the pastor preached from a jazz piano, they sang Disney theme songs as hymns, and for communion, no way, you're not going to believe this, they passed around Coca-Cola and potato chips. That is what happens when you push ethics over doctrine to the absolute extreme.
But hey, it wasn't all just Coca-Cola and cartoons. There were highly influential figures who grounded this ethical strategy in much more orthodox roots. Some focused heavily on the individual, like Henry Ward Beecher and Phillips Brooks, who sometimes leaned into a sort of health and wealth prosperity ethic. Others, like Washington Gladden and Walter Rauschenbusch, focused on broader social reform, founding what became famously known as the social gospel. They maintained their core theological roots while heavily stressing the ethical, proving this strategy could take both individual and societal paths.
All right, on to Section 4, Strategy 3, Religious Feeling.
If history is too brutal and ethics can become completely untethered, this third strategy attempted to save the faith by turning completely inward. To understand this, we have to look at Friedrich Schleiermacher. He was a German theologian, widely considered the father of liberal theology. He faced the exact same crisis in Germany a bit earlier on. He looked around and saw that the wealthy, the influential, the educated, the folks he called the cultural despisers of religion, they all thought the Bible was totally outmoded. And he felt this specific, burning mission to make Christianity relevant to them again.
He achieved this by just completely bypassing the intellectual debates altogether. He said, let's throw out dogma, doctrine, dense theology, and the literal interpretation of the Bible. So what's in? Religious feeling, emotion, a deeply personal internal attachment to God. And this brilliantly illustrates how Schleiermacher basically created a religion of the heart. His logic was simple. If religion is just a profound internal feeling, then the cultural despisers literally can't disprove it with science or history. It's bulletproof.
Which brings us to our final part, a surprising legacy.
These three survival strategies, deifying history, stressing ethics, and elevating inward feeling, left a massive, lasting cultural impact on how we view faith today. The absolute biggest legacy here is the compartmentalization of truth in our broader, modern culture. Because of this heavy emphasis on internal religious feeling, Christianity was able to peacefully coexist with the modern secular world by completely separating their realms. It's like a giant puzzle, right? Science can do its thing over here, education and art can do their things over there. There's no contest, no conflict, because religion exists safely, separately, and quietly within the subjective human heart. It was a brilliant, if highly debated, survival mechanism.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply profound question to ponder today. As we look back at classical Protestant liberalism, we really have to ask ourselves, did adapting so radically to the modern world actually save the Church's relevance? Or did it, by stripping away its foundational doctrines, ultimately dilute its core identity? It's a huge tension, and one that continues to echo through religious halls to this very day. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.